What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. And we have quite a bit of volleyball to recap, despite there not being any more NCAA to recap for the season, and no NBA or ABA this week. But we have some schedules to break down on the NCAA women's volleyball side. Kentucky has released its schedule for this fall. We also have non-conference schedules for Ohio State and Wisconsin. It's going to be a fun time previewing those schedules. And the number 1 and number 2 high school boys volleyball teams did battle on Saturday at Long Beach City College. Which team came out on top? Also, the Volleyball Nations League U.S. teams have been released on the men's and women's side. Which players made it? Which teams will be represented? The red, white, and blue. So hand me a volleyball. Set up the net, because I'm about to serve you up some volleyball action here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on iSports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome one, welcome all to another edition of Set Point. Thank you all for joining me on this beautiful Monday evening, Monday afternoon, Monday, wherever you are listening from. I know there's not a whole lot of volleyball to recap or to break down, but I managed to squeeze in some volleyball action from this past week. Without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. But first and foremost, we have a word from our sponsor. iSports Radio is proud to call the Southern California Warriors Semi-Pro Football Team the official sponsor of iSports Radio. The world of semi-pro sports is unlike any other sports organization. Players pay to play in hopes of so many different outcomes, whether it's playing to get filmed to try out for professional teams, big-time colleges, or just playing to stay in shape. No matter what, all semi-pro players have one thing in common, and that's playing for the love of the game. The SoCal Warriors have been on a quest to give players second chances since 2017. Whether you're in Southern California or anywhere in the world, give semi-pro sports a chance if you love your sport. You may get that second chance you've been waiting for as an athlete. You can follow them on Twitter at SoCal Warriors, on Instagram at Southern California_Warriors, and on Facebook by typing in the word Southern California then Warriors. And then IE Sports Radio is available on Twitter and on Instagram at IE Sports Radio, and on Facebook by typing in the word IE, then Sports, then Radio. And then they also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and when you go there, you will find a Patreon link, which starts out at $5 a month. This donation gets you a shout-out from all 32 of our shows, and higher tiers include IE Sports Radio merchandise, access to IESRU, the podcasting university of IE Sports Radio, and even a chance to be featured on The Defining Moment, iSports Radio's flagship show, featuring Larry B. Because for the past 8 years, iSports Radio has been bringing you amazing content, ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, building tailor-made shows, and also interviewing coaches and other authorized media personnel, and dedicating themselves to making shows to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, we've been continuing to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you, everyone, for making and contributing and continuing to make IE Sports Radio your direct feed for all that sports. Big shout out to our IE Sports Radio Fan of the Month, Justin Ekstrom. His Twitter is at thesportscrib21. He is a Minnesota Vikings fan. Also, shout out to our Patreon supporters. We have 4 now. Bay Area Raised Apparel, Marcus Los Great, Key to the Gate, and an anonymous supporter. Also, we would like to give a shout out to everyone for making iSports Radio's 8th anniversary special amazing. Here's to many more years to come. So now, without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. If you're kind of wondering why my voice is a little raspy, let's just say allergies have been kind of kicking my butt, but I'm not going to let that deter me. We're going to get into some volleyball action. So we're going to start by previewing the volleyball schedules of Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Kentucky. So Wisconsin and Ohio State have only released their non-conference schedules. Kentucky is the only team as of right now, and as I know of, that has released their full-on schedule. So, starting out on August 26th, they will be staying at home against Marquette. That's actually a pretty interesting matchup right there. Marquette is a good mid-tier team. I think they're a solid team. That's a team that made the NCAA tournament, and that could be a good early challenge for the Wildcats. I really think Marquette can really give Kentucky a challenge, especially since Kentucky has had a little bit of a roster turnover due to graduation and transfers. Then 2 days after, Kentucky will still remain at home against Ohio, University of Ohio. That will be played on August 28th. Then on September 2nd, Kentucky will be hitting the road to take on University of Northern Iowa. I want to say that's actually they're going to be heading down to Creighton for that little event. But it's not set in stone. Either way, they're facing University of Northern Iowa. I want to say that's Northern Iowa, not Northern Illinois. Either way, they're facing that team. And then on September 3rd, they actually have a doubleheader against two talented teams. They have Creighton on September 3rd, and then Creighton and USC both on those days. USC being the Southern California, just because they have another USC that they play, which I'll be getting into in a little bit. But USC and Creighton on September 3rd. It's away, so that's all I could really confirm. I don't know if it's at USC or at Creighton or Northern Iowa or Northern Illinois. And then on September 9th and 10th, they'll be facing either Indiana State or Wisconsin. Now, this Wisconsin matchup is going to be very fun. I really think this is going to be a barn burner right there. I really think that the reigning NCAA champion taking on Kentucky is going to be a really, really good matchup. And I'm looking forward to that matchup. I really am. This is the battle of two teams that are past NCAA women's volleyball champions. Notice how on the schedule it says or. It says Indiana State or Wisconsin. So I guess they haven't really finalized which team Wisconsin and Indiana State is playing on which day against Kentucky. So all I can tell you is that it's going to be on September 9th, and both Indiana State and Wisconsin are going to be at Kentucky. I could already hear the cheers from Kentucky fans in right now. And then also on their non-conference schedule, their last two games are very noteworthy. September 14th, Kentucky is still at home against its interstate rival Louisville. That is going to be a big barn burner. If last year's matchup against Louisville was any indication of those two teams are practically close with one another, this is an indication of this one is going to be basically all out. And Louisville is still pretty talented, and as well as Kentucky. Louisville did lose quite a bit to graduation, but I think Louisville still has what it takes to contend with some of the big teams out there. And then Nebraska is obviously another great matchup for Kentucky. This will be on September 17th, as the Huskers will be heading down to Lexington to take on Kentucky, and that is also another great matchup. I really like the non-conference schedule that Coach Skinner has. Like, he's got 6 really talented opponents in Marquette, USC, Creighton, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Louisville. Not saying that Northern Iowa, yes, that is confirmed that it is Northern Iowa. Ohio and Indiana State aren't really great matchups, but I just think that the previous ones that I just mentioned, I think those are going to be really test-worthy for Kentucky, and I think this will really gear Kentucky up for conference play, just because conference play is obviously going to be a beast. The SEC is always an unknown when it comes to every single year. Like, one year it'll be one team that was really good, not doing so great, and then it's going to be another year where a team that wasn't so great last year is doing really good. So I'm really looking forward to the SEC. Speaking of which, that is the perfect segue to jump into the conference schedule that Kentucky has. So on September 24th and 25th, Kentucky will be staying home in Lexington to take on LSU. Now, LSU did not have a great season last year. LSU had a pretty mess schedule. They actually had some expectations, and I actually thought they were going to do good this past season, but unfortunately, they kind of just belly flopped, and they had a couple of their games canceled due to weather inclinations, and then I think they had some injuries as well. Either way, LSU, I don't know if LSU is going to really challenge Kentucky. I think Kentucky will be able to take down LSU. We'll see. And then on September 28th, Kentucky will be hitting the road to take on Missouri. It'll be the battle of the cat teams, Tigers versus Wildcats. So Missouri had themselves quite the forgettable season, as Missouri had a dreadful season that had a lot of downs more so than ups. Missouri had a lot of growing pains. They had such a young team, and they lost a lot of players due to graduation and transfers. Do I think Missouri has potential? That still remains to be seen. But for Kentucky, they should be able to handle that matchup quite nicely. And then on October 1st, Kentucky will be heading back to Lexington to take on Alabama. We all know Alabama is the juggernaut in football, but women's volleyball, I don't really know. I don't think Alabama is slated to be as good. Unless they got a good recruiting class, I don't think Alabama is going to be really threatening Kentucky all that much. Then the schedule starts to jump a little bit in terms of the SEC as Kentucky hits the road to take on Arkansas. So Arkansas was one of the first four teams out in last year's NCAA tournament. And I don't know, I think maybe Arkansas, with a little bit of an improvement, can do damage in the SEC. This is going to be Kentucky's first test, as they're actually going to be facing quite a bit of good teams, starting off with that Arkansas pair. And then coming back home to Lexington, Kentucky will take on Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss was another improved team from last season. Ole Miss really started off well, and honestly, I'll be interested to see how Ole Miss does. Do I think that Kentucky should have some problems with Ole Miss? I don't think so, but I want to say Ole Miss was one of the few teams that took a set off of Kentucky this past season. So, in terms of the SEC, of course. Either way, I think Ole Miss is going to be quite the interesting challenge. And then, following that matchup, Kentucky will be hitting the road for a 2-game road trip against Texas A&M on October 22nd and October 23rd. So the Aggies did not have the season they were hoping for. They did break Cal Poly's long winning streak, which was the longest in the nation. However, the buck kind of stopped there, as they didn't really have the season that just blew my mind. And Texas A&M is one of those teams that kind of lives up to its reputation. They don't have the best seasons, but they don't really have the worst seasons. They're kind of that middle tier of good and bad. So, as for Kentucky traveling to Texas A&M, I really think that Kentucky should be able to handle Texas A&M. And then after that, they will be heading back home to take on Auburn on October 29th and 30th. So, Auburn, I don't have too many positives to say about Auburn. I mean, it's kind of there. And I'm not trying to say anything too terrible about Auburn, but I don't think they're going to really touch Kentucky. Now, will I be eating my words if they're able to do so? Probably. But I just don't think that this Auburn team can touch Kentucky. We'll see. And then Kentucky has a 2-game road trip. This will be against 2 different opponents. On November 2nd, Kentucky will be hitting the road to the ATL to take on Georgia. So, I don't think it's in Athens, Georgia. So, my bad. So, it's in Athens, Georgia to take on Georgia. So, Georgia was one of those interesting teams that seems to always pull off one random upset in the SEC a year. I don't know if that's going to be the case for Kentucky. I really don't think Georgia has what it takes to take down Kentucky. Now, obviously, you never know what the season can bring, but for me, I just think Kentucky's going to be too much to handle. Now, following that matchup, Kentucky has 9 days off before their next matchup against Mississippi State, which that's going to be a fun matchup. Now, Mississippi State had themselves such a historic season. They had the most wins probably in team history, and they made the tournament since the mid-90s, I want to say. Unfortunately, Mississippi State fell short to Hawaii, which is the Big West juggernaut. However, this year should be promising considering Mississippi State gave their coach a contract extension. And Mississippi State is playing Kentucky at Mississippi. So I really think Hail State could give Kentucky a battle. It all depends. We'll see. And then and you also got to remember that Kentucky's not going to be able to have a match until November 11th. So that's a 9-day gap. So there could be some rust. So I think that Mississippi State matchup is a big trap game, because their following game is going to be against Tennessee, their rival, on November 16th. It's going to be at Kentucky. So when it comes to rivalry games, all bets are off. I really think Tennessee has something good going on within their program. They've got some good transfers. They've got some players returning for their 5th-year option in terms of the COVID year. And overall, I think Tennessee should be able to give a battle to Kentucky. Last year's matchup between the Vols and the Wildcats was just so underwhelming. I really hope that Tennessee can make it a battle. I definitely think the Vols have something going on in their program. We'll see, though. And then Kentucky hits the road for its final road trip against Florida. So the Florida matchup is always an unknown. Sometimes Florida will be at its highs, and then more times than not, Florida will be pretty much floundering on the mid-tier. Last year was kind of the case of Florida being around mid-tier, but for the Gators, it's always a battle when you're in Gainesville. I really think Florida can give Kentucky a battle, especially since Florida did get one good transfer. I want to say she came from Virginia or Syracuse. I have to double check, but either way, Florida has always been good year in and year out. They always have good recruiting classes, and Mary Wise always does a great job preparing her team for any opponent whatsoever. And then Kentucky's final 2 games of the season. By the way, the Florida matchups will be on November 19th and 20th. And then the final 2 games of the season for Kentucky will be on November 25th and 26th against the other USC, South Carolina. Those matchups will be at home. For those of you that do remember last year, South Carolina upset Kentucky, which actually wound up being Kentucky's only conference loss last year. So I really think that South Carolina has the potential, and they could definitely build off of last year's success. It's just all about if they can be comfortable playing in Kentucky's gym, just because Kentucky has a lot of raucous fans, and depending on what happens with Florida and Tennessee and all the other teams that are vying for the SEC crown, could depend on if this matchup or matchups has SEC crown championship potential. So I really think that South Carolina-Kentucky matchup is underwhelming. You also have to wonder what South Carolina can do with all the transfers it got, especially the ones that came from Penn State. I really think that could possibly be for the SEC title. But time will tell. Anything could happen in this span from now all the way to November. So that is Kentucky's schedule right there in a nutshell. Jumping on over to the Big Ten, we have Wisconsin's non-conference schedule. Now, this is just non-conference. We don't know what their Big Ten schedule is going to look like, so that's going to be for another day. Anyway, so jumping on over to Wisconsin's non-conference schedule, they open up the season on the road against TCU, against the Horned Frogs. So I don't think they'll have too much No, I shouldn't say that. TCU is actually a somewhat legitimate team. They're probably the most underrated team in the Big 10 or Big 12, just because Texas and Baylor kind of takes the spotlight away from them, and that's kind of not fair for Wisconsin. Either way, I think the Badgers should be able to handle them, but definitely watch out for Aaliyah Carter. She is definitely a talent unmatched on that Horned Frogs team. We'll see. And then staying when it comes to the matchups between the Big 10 and the Big 12, Wisconsin will be staying in Fort Worth to take on Baylor. I guess this is a Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup. So I imagine the other team will probably be like Minnesota or Nebraska. It all depends. But the Baylor-Wisconsin matchup is going to be a great matchup right there. Just because Baylor and Wisconsin meet each other more often than not, and they did meet each other in that 2019 semifinal match where Wisconsin was able to upend the number 1 seed Baylor. So honestly, I really think Baylor and Wisconsin could be a big barn burner. Following, and by the way, that's going to be on August 26th and 27th. And then on September 2nd, Wisconsin will be heading back home to take on an interstate rival in Marquette. That is going to be a very fun matchup. Now, obviously on paper, Wisconsin is the favorite to beat Marquette. However, you got to look at the number of players that Wisconsin lost to graduation. Obviously being led by Dana Redke. It's all going to pretty much be on the returning players, pretty much led by Anna Smrek, who had herself an outstanding NCAA tournament. I'm really loving that Marquette matchup. I think that's going to be a great matchup right there. And I look forward to seeing Marquette and Wisconsin. I think that has the potential to being a sneaky good matchup. And then on the 4th of September, Wisconsin will be facing off against High Point. So High Point has kind of had their highs, see what I did there, and their lows when it comes to their own conference. But I don't know. I think High Point can be somewhat of a challenge. I wouldn't really say that it's too challenging. I think it's just going to be one of those lessons that High Point learns. But it's probably going to be a painful lesson. Not trying to diss High Point in any way. It's just that Wisconsin is just so loaded. Now, Wisconsin, I talked about their matchup against Kentucky. They'll be playing Kentucky at Kentucky on November 9th or November 10th. They also will be facing off against Campbell, but here's the thing. It's not really decided on whether they'll be playing on the 9th or the 10th. So, basically, Indiana State will be coming to Lexington, Kentucky, but it's not finalized on who they'll face on which day. So Campbell will be the other matchup for Wisconsin that's not Kentucky, and then Indiana State will be the matchup that Kentucky faces that's not named Wisconsin. On September 16th, Wisconsin will be heading back home to take on Florida. Now that's going to be a little bit of an underrated matchup. Obviously on paper, Florida lost a lot to graduation, but so did Wisconsin. This is going to be a very fun matchup, and I really think that Florida has what it takes to keep pace with Wisconsin. I think it's just going to be one of those Power 5 conference battles, which I think can go either way. I obviously think Wisconsin will win. Early prediction right there, but don't count out Florida. I think Florida has that potential. It's just all about if they could show it. And then the final non-conference game for Wisconsin will be against Rhode Island on September 18th. No offense, but I feel that matchup was just slapped there for some reason. I don't know. It's like, why Rhode Island? I'm not trying to bash Rhode Island or why Wisconsin scheduled High Point and Campbell. Maybe they just didn't have any other opponents that wanted to play Wisconsin, but I don't know. That Rhode Island matchup is kind of a trap game matchup, just because after that matchup, they head into Big Ten play, and the Big Ten is loaded just because there's a lot of good teams. Even Maryland, the team that beat Wisconsin, can be a challenge. So there's no easy nights in the Big Ten, and I think that Rhode Island game is kind of a trap game. So that's kind of my positive for Rhode Island. Other than that, Wisconsin should be able to handle that whatsoever. So that is Wisconsin's non-conference women's volleyball schedule. Now jumping over to Ohio State. This non-conference schedule, or out-of-conference schedule, is one beast of an out-of-conference schedule. This is probably the best out-of-conference schedule I have ever seen. And you gotta give credit to Jen Flynn Oldenburg. She really scheduled tough. So, a little bit of an early outlook for Ohio State. They return a bunch of their players from last year's team that made it all the way to the Sweet 16. And obviously they play in the Big Ten, where nothing is guaranteed. However, this is a team that has lots of potential. And looking at this non-conference schedule, this is going to be a beastly schedule that they're taking on. So, Ohio State's first game, right out the gate, is against an Elite Eight opponent, Texas. Apparently they're playing two matches against Texas in Columbus, Ohio on August 26th and 27th. That is going to be a big barn burner matchup. Just because Texas obviously lost some key pieces from last year's team, but they obviously returned Logan Eggleston, as well as Jenna Gabriel and a few others. I really think that the Texas matchup is going to be a huge way to kick off the season for Ohio State. I would not be surprised if that was a primetime matchup on ESPN. So, there you go. That's how Ohio State's going to be kicking off the season. Then on September 3rd, Ohio State will be hitting the road to Louisville, Kentucky to take on San Diego. So San Diego made the NCAA tournament. They got knocked out of the round of 64, the first round. But that does not mean that San Diego is a bad team. Obviously, they just had themselves a tough draw getting Rice in the first round, and that's kind of a pick-em matchup right there. So San Diego was always perennially good, and I think this matchup against San Diego could be underrated. I definitely think Ohio State on paper has the potential to win early on, but don't count out San Diego. Obviously, they lost quite a bit to graduation, but that San Diego team is pretty decent, honestly. And then on September 4th, Ohio State will be taking on the host team of the little Louisville mini tournament, Louisville. Now, that's the team that made the Final Four. That was the team that was undefeated going into the matchup against Wisconsin. That's another barn burner right there. And it's going to be in Louisville, so you can imagine Louisville's KFC Yum Center is going to be packing and just raucous and stomping all over the place. I really think that the Louisville Ohio State matchup is just going to be something to watch for. Like, Ohio State really went all out when it comes to their non-conference schedule. It gets better, though. Much better. So, September 9th, Ohio State will be heading down to Atlanta. Now, this time, a team's going to be heading down to the ATL, as they'll be taking on BYU. So, that's going to be a very good matchup. BYU made the the Sweet 16, because now I remember, BYU made the Sweet 16. I had them going to the Elite 8, and then I don't know what happened, but they really shot themselves in the foot against Purdue. So, that BYU-Ohio State matchup is going to be great right there. And BYU is always good year in and year out. I really think BYU has that potential to, challenge all these big powerhouses. And then on September 11th, Ohio State will be taking on the host team, Georgia Tech. So we all know how good Georgia Tech was last year. They obviously lost Mariana Brambilla to graduation, but they still have the human wrecking ball in Julia Bergman, who made the Brazilian national team, which is awesome sauce. So Georgia Tech obviously made the Elite Eight last year. However, facing off against Ohio State, this is going to be a rematch of last year's Sweet 16 matchup. You also got to remember that Ohio State lost to Georgia Tech last year in the NCAA tournament, and this is going to be that rematch that Ohio State has been licking its lips for. It's going to be a very great matchup, and honestly, I would not be surprised if that one went 5. Speaking of NCAA tournament rematches, Ohio State will be heading down to the Yinzertown, aka Pittsburgh, for the Pitt tournament as they take on Tennessee on September 17th. So, like I said, this is a rematch of last year's round of 32 matchup against the Vols. So Tennessee obviously is a promising team this year. A lot of returners. I really think Tennessee has what it takes to keep up with any team. It's a little early to say this, but I think Ohio State could win that matchup. But I would not be surprised if the Vols and the Buckeyes went 5 sets. Just because both those teams have a lot of firepower on their team. I really think that this team that both these teams have great potential to compete in their conferences. And who knows, maybe they'll win their respective conferences. We'll see. And then closing out the non-conference schedule, Ohio State faces a Final Four team from last year, Pitt, on September 18th. Once again, that's going to be another barn burner. That could basically be a primetime matchup. And I really think that Pitt versus Ohio State is going to be a fun matchup. Pitt obviously has the question marks of they lost a lot of players from last year, and they face this juggernaut Ohio State team. It's basically going to be a battle between two Power 5 conference teams, and this could basically be for seeding. And also, this could be a potential trap game for both teams, as for Ohio State, that's their final non-conference game of the season, as they'll be heading into Big Ten Conference play, most likely against a team that has high potential. Whether it's Penn State or Illinois or Nebraska or anyone, Ohio State's going to be basically battle-tested, especially when they have that Pitt matchup on their radar. So that is pretty much that for Ohio State. I really give Ohio State women's volleyball a lot of credit for their up-and-coming non-conference schedule. It's probably the toughest non-conference schedule I've ever seen. Because look at that. It's all NCAA tournament teams. Like, I don't think I've seen any team schedule non-conference teams that tough. My good golly gracious. Whoo, Nelly. So that is that for my schedule previews for the NCAA women's volleyball season. My voice has pretty much been shot as of right now, so we're going to take ourselves a quick little commercial breaky break. When we come back, we've got some Volleyball Nations League to go over in terms of the U.S., and then we also have the recap of the CIF Southern Section Division I Championship match. You are listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back once my voice recovers.
What's up, sports fans? Are you looking for the latest on Northern California sports? Then take a trip out west with me, your host, Gina G, on Reppin' the NorCal Sports, right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. I'll be bringing it to you all the way live every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's always a packed show. I'll bring you everything dynastic 49ers, the bite of the San Jose Sharks, torture of the San Francisco Giants, the Golden State Warriors that we still believe. Then take you across the bay to the rise and grind of the Oakland A's. I've got you covered on college ball from the Cal Bears to the Stanford Cardinal, so that no matter what, reppin' in NorCal sports is always reppin' the Bay. So if you bleed red and gold, or you're looking to keep an eye out west in them thar hills, don't miss me, Gina G, on reppin' in NorCal sports. Catch me every Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'll have your fandom repped harder than a trio of defenders guarding Stephen Curry before his buzzer beater is Gucci.
Sports fans, do you like teams that are tough, cities that are tougher, and fan bases that are passionate about their teams? How about teams that are historic and stadiums that are iconic? Then you belong in Chicago, and you need to check out Chi-Town Weekly. Join me, Adam Kernan, every week as we keep up with all things Chicago sports. Bears, Bulls, Blackhawks, Cubs, White Sox. We'll cover them all, plus more. The Windy City is always buzzing, and we'll keep you up on all the big games and major stories. So tune in to Chi-Town Weekly every week right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Davidson.
It's your boy, Dentarius Lava.
And we are the hosts of Fast Break here on IE Sports Radio, where we discuss everything in the world of basketball from prep to the pros.
You guys should definitely check us out, man. Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We got all the basketball information you guys need, so we look forward to you guys listening in.
And please do, because we are the best basketball show on this side of the Mississippi. And please do check us out on Twitter at FastBreakISR. D-Lock, where's our time again?
8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That gives you guys plenty of time on a Sunday.
Tune in.
IE Sports Radio. It is your direct feed for all that is sports. It is Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris every Tuesday night right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris is the most comprehensive view on Philadelphia sports exclusively right here on IE Sports Radio. You know what it is, your direct feed for all that is sports. Tuesday night, IE Sports Radio, Philly Sports Talk with Cash and Chris.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely do take a listen to our shows such as Philly Sports Talk, Fast Break, Reppin' to NorCal Sports, and Chi-Town Weekly. Chi-Town Weekly goes on every Monday right before this show, and then also Fast Break goes on Sundays, and Philly Sports Talk and Reppin' to NorCal Sports all go on Tuesday. So there is that little plug right there. Now, this past Saturday, there was the number 1 and number 2 team in the nation via MaxPreps facing off against one another in the CIF Southern Section Division I Boys Volleyball Final. It pitted the Loyola Cubs, the number 1 team in the nation, versus the Newport Harbor Sailors, who was the number 2 team in the nation. Both these teams met in a matchup in the regular season where Loyola just pretty much stomped all over Newport Harbor in straight sets. That was all the way back in about mid-March. Both these teams were drastically improved, and I was in attendance for this matchup. And boy howdy, it did not disappoint to start off. So starting off in the first set, Loyola came out guns a-blazing. Led by the outside hitter and strong arm of Dylan Klein, Loyola just straight up just punched Newport Harbor in the mouth. I was like, okay, this is looking like exactly like the first matchup. As Loyola took the first set 25-15, I was like, oh my goodness, this is not good. Because Newport Harbor was not passing well. They were not doing well in serve receive. And honestly, if you're struggling in terms of passing and serve receive, you're going to be at the mercy of opposing teams. So the second set was a whole lot better for Newport Harbor. They got off to an early fast start. They had no intention of slowing down. They were pretty much led by the strong arm in the middle from James Eady, as well as the left and right side of Riggs Guy on the right side, and Jake Reed / Luca Kirchi on the left side. Newport Harbor had no intention of having a letdown in the set as they took the second set 25-20, and then we had ourselves a barn burner right there. That's when everyone came alive, and there was lots of belief starting to arise, not just from the crowd, but the players of Newport Harbor as well. Set 3 was a whole little bit of a different story, as Loyola pretty much led throughout most of that set. I don't even think they trailed once, honestly. Give credit to Newport Harbor, they tried to keep pace with Loyola, but those Cubs were just too strong. In addition to having a very talented player in Dylan Klein, they also had great contributions from Ryan Venna, the middle blocker, Sean Kelly, the sophomore right side hitter. Loyola was just stacked all around, and they had a heavy senior-laden team, as Loyola took the third set 25-20, as they were one set away from winning their first CIF Southern Section Championship since 2016. Newport Harbor needed a bit of a spark. The fourth set was kind of, it was basically a boxing match. It just went back and forth, both teams trading blows, just a tug of war. Newport Harbor grabbed the lead at 18-15. It looked as if Loyola was going to try to make a little bit of a comeback, but Newport Harbor started serving the ball really well. They had 4 aces in that set, and I was quite impressed with how Newport Harbor came alive in terms of its passing, in terms of its serving, and all in all, it was just the tale of two halves of that fourth set. Newport Harbor took that fourth set 25-19, and we were going 5 sets, and I was like, it's only fitting that both these teams, the number 1 team and the number 2 team, go 5 sets. So the 5th set was basically just both teams feeling each other out. Both teams were making I wouldn't say feasible mistakes, but they were just making some miscues, unintentional miscues. Newport Harbor eventually grabbed the lead at 7-5, and Loyola took their first time out. Newport Harbor eventually led 10-7, and it looked as if the Sailors were home free. But you never want to underestimate Loyola, as they rounded off 2 straight points. One of them was a little bit, I wouldn't say controversial, but if there was instant replay, Newport Harbor would definitely love to challenge that play, because they were saying that the call was touched off of the ball was touched off of a Loyola player off of a swing from Newport Harbor, but it was ruled out, and Newport Harbor fans were not pleased whatsoever. That eventually made the match 10-9 in favor of Newport Harbor. I want to say Loyola tied it up at 10-10, but then Newport Harbor started to take charge ASAP. They maintained a healthy lead of at least 2 points. They made sure Loyola did not get within 1, because that's when Loyola is most dangerous. They're also most dangerous at the service line, but more on that later. So eventually Newport Harbor led 13-12, and I want to say it was James Eady pounded down a kill to put Newport Harbor at championship point. It was either James Eady or Jake Reed, and at the service line was James Eady. He had himself quite a strong serve, which Loyola had to free ball it over to the Newport Harbor side, and Newport Harbor did not waste any time getting the final kill, as Jake Reed, coming in from the left side, just pounded the ball through the block, and Newport Harbor wound up winning its 5th CIF Southern Section Championship in its team's history, as they won the 5th set 15-12. The celebration was on. It was just an electric atmosphere overall, standing room only, and boy howdy, this really felt like a national championship matchup. It was just amazing. I was just in awe. I'm like, wow. It was great for the sport as well, because obviously this is what the game of volleyball needs. Like, hot atmosphere, lots of cheering fans, just standing room only. The match was played at Long Beach City College, and it did not disappoint. Thank you to Long Beach City for being great hosts, by the way. So, that was quite the fun matchup right there for Newport Harbor. The fact that they really came through in that 5th set really shows how much growth Newport Harbor has come from that first matchup of the season against Loyola, the first and only matchup of the season against Loyola. So, overall, I was quite impressed with Newport Harbor. Loyola also impressed me just because they were serving really tough. However, Newport Harbor held Loyola to 0 service aces the rest of the way, and that is quite impressive, just because Loyola serves the you-know-what out of the ball more times than not. And you could probably compare Loyola to an NCAA men's volleyball team with how tough they serve. So overall, I am quite impressed with both these teams. I felt a little bad for Loyola and its senior class, especially Dylan Klein. I have a little bit of a soft spot for him, number 1, because he's just a darn talented player, and number 2, the dude's going to USC. Fight on. So overall, we could be seeing these two teams facing one another in the CIF Southern Section, or the CIF SoCal Regional Playoffs, as Newport Harbor is the number 1 seed, while Loyola is the number 2 seed. If serve holds when it comes to both of those teams, those two could be meeting each other in the finals, and depending on where both teams want to have the finals, depends on where it'll be at. So, we'll see if it'll be, because it's actually home team. The home team is basically the higher seed, which means that if Newport Harbor and Loyola play, then Newport Harbor will be at home. So, but then Newport Harbor also has the luxury of saying, oh, we don't want to play it at our gym. We want to play it at like a bigger gym, such as Edison, maybe Long Beach City, if they can get permission to use the gym. It all depends, but we'll see what happens. In order to get to the final, they have to get through the first round and the semifinals. Then we get the coveted rubber match. So that's my little recap of Newport Harbor and Loyola in the CIF Southern Section Division I championship match. It lived up to the hype. I will start off by saying that. I really loved this matchup. This featured the best team from Los Angeles versus the best team from Orange County. It does not get any better than that. And I hate to use this storyline, but it was basically the battle of public school versus private school. Public school being Newport Harbor, private school being Loyola. And it really showed that Newport Harbor had a lot of grit and determination, because the first matchup between Newport Harbor and Loyola, Newport got smoked. On their home floor, mind you. So for Newport Harbor to do that in the finals is really speaks to high volumes of how much they've improved. Also, this is a Newport Harbor team that has finals experience. I think their finals experience really came in handy, especially last year when it lost to Miracosta at Miracosta. So overall, I think the seniors on that team really came out with a sense of urgency. Not just the seniors as well, but all the players from last year's team of Newport Harbor that lost in the CIF Southern Section Division I final. So that is pretty much, I think that's pretty much all I have to say. I don't have the official stats. All I can tell you is that Jake Reed led the way for Newport Harbor with 16 kills. James Eady was right behind him with 13. And then Luca Kirchi added 11. Loyola was led by Dylan Klein, who had 22 kills. Sean Kelly had 10 kills. And I don't know who was their third kill leader, but he had single-digit kills. So there was that. All in all, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I feel that Loyola got tired down the stretch in that fifth set. Now, obviously, they did all that they could to stay within striking distance of Newport Harbor, but you have to give credit to Newport Harbor. They really just had that burst of energy which boosted them in that fifth set. Part of it is because they had a turning point in the season where they lost a 5-set match to Los Alamitos in a regular season match. And then ever since then, they haven't lost again. And then the other part is that they've played such a challenging schedule. They play in a very tough league, in the Surf League, which had one team make the quarterfinals, one team make the Division I bracket, and then the other team being one of the top teams in a lower division, but they didn't make the playoffs. I digress. So I'm not trying to say that Loyola's schedule wasn't as tough. Like, Loyola did schedule tough as well. They scheduled quite a bit of talented teams, such as Newport Harbor. Also scheduled Corona del Mar, Miracosta, and then a few other teams as well. They also played in Best of the West with Newport Harbor, got second in that tournament. So overall, I really thought Loyola was good. I just think they kind of wilted down the stretch. But we'll see. I think both these teams could meet with one another come this week, because this is the last week of the volleyball season in California, and I think both of these teams are definitely looking forward to a rematch. They just can't look that far ahead, though. So that is that for the CIF Southern Section Division I Finals recap. So let's take one last commercial break, as once again my voice has been shot. Once again, I've been battling allergies throughout the past couple days, but I gotta keep the show running. So we'll take one last commercial break. When we come back, we'll have some Volleyball Nations League United States teams to go over. Then I'll send you all on your way. You're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back once my voice recovers.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Harrison Glazer, and we're coming at you from the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. I cover the Jets, the Islanders, the Nets, and the Yankees.
This is Pierre Moss, and I cover the Mets, Knicks, Rangers, and the Giants.
Our show is live every Wednesday through Spreaker and a bunch of other ways to get our content. Again, we're the show that never sleeps podcast. We talk about all those New York sports. It's a lot of fun. We get into all of it. Please tune in. Again, that's Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
And we look forward to having you guys right here on 90 Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What's good, fight fans? It's your boy, Marcus Los Great, here to give you what you want, here to give you what you need. Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm coming to you live, straight from your mama's basement with a crispy, awesome white tea. We are coming to you live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Powered by IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
College football, and do you want to hear a college football show dedicated to all that is college football, including junior college and the CCCAA and the NJCAA, the NAIA, and the NCAA, including Division III, Division II, Division I AA in the FCS, and Division I A in the FBS? Well then look no further. Join myself, Larry B., and my colleagues, Mr. H-Town Blake Henley, and Mr. Christian Espinoza, each week during the college football season for the latest in college football on 3 and Out College Edition, right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
That's right, everybody. Definitely do check out Larry B. and myself on 3 and Out College Edition here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Alright, just gonna chug my way through this final segment. This is the Volleyball Nations League roster reveal for the United States. So, for the U.S., they actually have quite a bit of their players back from the Olympic team from this past summer. Those players include setter Micah Hancock, setter Jordan Poulter, middle blocker Chiaka Ogbogu, Haley Washington, opposite Annie Drews, as well as opposite Jordan Thompson, and then outside hitter Kelsey Robinson, and libero Justine Wong Orantes. Now, there are 8 players from the VNL who have experience or have been on past VNL rosters, such as Lauren Carlini, Tori Dixon, Dana Retke, Hannah Tapp, which rounds off the middles. The setter was Lauren Carlini. The opposite includes Danielle Catino, and the outside hitters include Catherine Plummer, Maddie Kingsdon, Rochelle, and Sarah Wilhite Parsons. And finally, the newcomers for the VNL U.S. women's volleyball team consist of Jenna Gray, the setter, middle blocker Breon Butler, and Anna Stevenson. Opposite, Nia Reed. Outside hitters Cara Bejima, Danny Drews, no relation to Annie, and Ali Fronti. and liberos Morgan Hentz and Kendall White. That's pretty much your VNL team right there. They will be head coached by Karch Kirale. Coach Karch Kirale. And his assistant coaches will be Aaron Vertu, Tama Miyashiro, and Alfie Reft. So that's pretty much your schedule. That's pretty much the team right there. The schedule includes their first match being on May 31st against Dominican Republic, June 3rd against Canada, June 4th against Brazil. That's going to be the barn burner matchup right there. June 5th against Japan, which rounds off Week 1. Week 2 will be in the Philippines. On June 15th, they'll be taking on Bulgaria. June 16th against Poland. June 18th against China. June 19th against Thailand rounds off the Week 2 matchups at the Philippines. Week 3 will be in Calgary, Canada, as their first matchup will be against Belgium on June 29th, Serbia on June 30th, Turkey on July 2nd, and the final matchup of regular season play will be on July 4th, on Sunday, against Germany. The finals will take place in Turkey, and it'll be on July 13th and 17th. So, I want to say the U.S., and I'm 95% certain the U.S. won the VNL last year, which was quite impressive. I was very impressed with how the U.S. won. They have some newcomers. They obviously don't have Jordan Larson, but I think they have quite the talented team right there, especially with Catherine Plummer. I think she's going to be a great addition for the roster as well. And then you also have other newcomers as well, and they also have some experienced players too. So I think this is going to be a mixture of experience, inexperience, and slight experience. I think this is going to be a fun team to watch, and I still think they're the team to beat when it comes to the VNL. Jumping over to the men's side, we have, in terms of the returners from the Tokyo Games in 2021, setter Micah Christensen, libero Eric Shoji, opposite Kyle Ensing, middle blocker David Smith, or middle blockers David Smith and Mitch Stahl, and outside hitters TJ DeFalco, Thomas Jaschke, and Garrett Muagututia. Aaron Russell is returning from the U.S. men's national team, which won bronze in the 2016 Olympics, but he is returning from surgery, which he was unable to play in the 2021 Olympic Games. VNL players on the men's team that have experience are Jeff Gendrick, middle blocker, opposites Jake Haynes and Kyle Russell, and libero Kyle D'Agostino and setter Josh Tuaniga. And then the newcomers to the VNL men's volleyball U.S. roster includes setters James Shaw and Quinn Isaacson, middle blockers Patrick Gassman, Merrick McHenry, and Tyler Mitchum, outside hitters Cody Kessel, Jacob Pasteur, Will Rotman, and Brett Wildman, and lastly, the libero will be Mason Briggs. So this is going to be a fairly young team when it comes to the U.S. VNL roster team. I think it's going to be a fun team. Obviously, the men have a lot of, I wouldn't say like redemption, but they have unfinished business to attend to, and they know they can. They know they have a lot of work to do to be just as successful as the women. I definitely think they have that potential. They have the coaching staff as well, as their head coach will be John Sparrow, and their assistant coaches will be Matthew Furbringer and Mike Wall, and then their performance analyst and technical coordinator will be Nate No. He follows me on Twitter. And then I also got to make note of the consultant coach, Mike Seeley, just because I know who he is, and he's a solid all-around guy. He's the UCLA women's volleyball coach. Gotta give love to the Seals, a.k.a. Mike Seeley. So this U.S. men's VNL roster team should be a fun team to watch. I think it'll take them a little bit of time to mesh with one another, but I definitely think they have that potential. The potential is there. It's just getting the right pieces all together. So we'll see what happens when it comes to the U.S. men's team, when it comes to the Volleyball Nations League. I really think I really think that this team has lots of potential, so we'll see. And overall, their schedule is going to consist of, via the Team USA volleyball website, starting on June 7th in Brazil, the U.S. will play Slovenia. Then on June 9th, the U.S. takes on the Netherlands. June 10th will be against Japan, and then June 11th will be against Brazil. Round 2, or week 2, will be in Sofia, Bulgaria. The U.S. will be taking on Serbia on June 22nd. June 23rd, the U.S. takes on Iran. June 25th, the U.S. takes on Bulgaria. And then June 26th, the U.S. rounds off that week, taking on Poland. Then in round 3, the U.S. will be hitting the road to Osaka, Japan, as their first matchup will be on July 4th against Germany. Then on July 6th, the U.S. takes on France. July 8th, the U.S. takes on Canada, and then on July 9th, the U.S. takes on Argentina. The final round, unlike the women, will be later on the week, as July 20th through the 24th will be the final round of the Volleyball Nations League, and it will be held in Bologna, Italy. So that's something to look forward to when it comes to the VNL on the men's side. I really think the U.S. men's team has the potential. Once again, it's just all about everyone getting on the same page, and hopefully Aaron Russell getting back to 100% to the best of his ability. It would be quite pivotal to basically have him as 100%. So we'll see what Aaron Russell can bring to the table once he's 100%. But on that note, that's going to do it for the Volleyball Nations League U.S. men's and women's roster, and that's going to do it for Set Point. Without any further delay, before my voice gives out, let us drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. Also, I'll give a shout out to Adam Harnick, who popped in the chat at the beginning of the show. He says, "Hey, Teran, Monday crew." Definitely do check out Adam's show, Chi-Town Weekly, every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. Adam does a great job breaking down things Chicago sports. Also, he hosts the Neutral Zone with Zach Topoulos every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Definitely do check out that. NHL playoffs are getting good. But back to my thank yous. Thank you, everyone, for your support of Set Point. Thank you, everyone that listened. Thank you to everyone that endured hearing my raspy voice as I had to pretty much power through this hour and 8+ minutes. Whether you listen live, I appreciate you. Whether you listen on the playback, I appreciate you. Whether you listen at work, I appreciate you. Whether you listen at any time, any point, anywhere, I appreciate you. It really means a lot. I also appreciate the support that you all give for IE Sports Radio. It really means the world. For everyone here at IE Sports Radio, this is Teran Rodriguez signing off. Y'all have yourselves a great rest of the week. Enjoy the volleyball action, even though there's not too much. I'll be back on Friday for the SoCal Supreme Court show. Good night, everybody. Peace.